Hello, I'm Juliet Mann, and this is the Agenda podcast, CGTN Europe's one-stop shop for smart, in-depth discussion of the issues that really matter in the world today. Caring for the elderly isn't just about families, it's shaping the future of our economies. From Beijing to Berlin, retirement doesn't look like the way it used to, and pensions are becoming a global game changer. Europe faces shrinking workforces and pension protests, while in China, the silver economy is booming as millions of retirees reshape business and society. So will ageing societies drive innovation and growth or drag the global economy into crisis? To discuss that, I'm joined now by Peng, Dean of the School of Population and Health at Renmin University, Nicholas Barr, Professor of Public Economics at the European Institute at LSE, and Haleh Nazeri, Longevity Economy Lead at the World Economic Forum. Thank you all so much for coming on the agenda. Haleh, let me start with you. What do you think that the long-term impact is going to be of shrinking labour forces on global economic growth?
I think it's time for innovation as people are living longer lives. I think it's a great opportunity for us to rethink the way we have structured things in the past. I think one of the things that we're seeing right now with the pension systems, it was created for a world where somebody lived till about the age of 65 or 70, and that is no longer the case. So what we need to do going forward is think about what a 100-year life looks like and adjust everything to that new reframing of longer lives, whether that's school, whether that's work, whether that's pensions. Everything needs to be reframed in order to adjust for this really wonderful thing that's happening where we are living longer lives.
We're talking about the positives there, but Nicholas, I'm thinking about the challenges that potentially await us. I mean, what's your take? Are we waiting for a pensions time bomb to go off, or does it really depend where in the world you are?
Well, I think it's exactly as Haleh Nazeri has said. There is a bomb waiting to go off, and it's going to explode if governments do too little to respond. What one needs to do is to increase output. With declining fertility, there's going to be fewer workers. With longer life expectancy, there'll be more pensioners. The way to afford pension is to increase national output enough. And to do that, you need more workers, so longer working life. You also need to make each individual member of that smaller workforce more productive by investing in their human capital. So it needs economic change, and it's fairly clear what that needs to be. But as been said, it also needs the social change to go along with that.
Peng, what would you say that the root causes are of the pensions crisis we're seeing today? Because it's not just that we're living longer, is it? I'm thinking, China has quite an underdeveloped pension system, doesn't it?
I should say on one side, China has very rapidly developed pension systems comparing to 2 decades ago. You see, by that time, only maybe 20% workers, they are covered by the pensions. But nowadays, it's universal coverage by the pension system. So it's very rapidly developed. On the other side, in fact, when we talk about the undeveloped pension systems, it's also a challenge in China, for example, like the big gap between the rural and the urban pension systems. Yeah. So if you are living in the cities, maybe you have a reasonable level of the pension, but in rural areas still lag behind. So in that case, we need to develop the national pension systems to increase the level of security. And at the same time, we must speed up the narrowing of the gap between the rural and the urban.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we're thinking about from country to country and region to region, but also within those countries, you're saying there's a huge difference between urban systems, rural systems, and how we approach retirement in that way. And Haleh, I wonder if you think that younger generations are maybe unfairly burdened by the current pension systems.
I think if governments are thinking future forward, I think if companies are thinking about different ways to help people save their money, increase their pensions, financial education, learn to invest, I think we can make it out through the other side and everyone can be successful here. So do I think the burden is currently being placed on the younger person? No, I think it's actually stressful for everyone to try to figure out what is next and how to move forward.
I suppose I was thinking as the population gets older, the workforce is shrinking, which then would put more of a financial burden on that shrinking workforce, Haleh.
So that is true, but I also think that we're thinking about the workforce in the way we used to in the past, where people worked more actively outside in industrial kind of jobs. And now there's a lot more jobs where hopefully many people get the privilege of sitting behind a desk or having a white collar job. And these people can actually and do want to work longer. So this is another way of thinking about it, is that a 30-year retirement isn't really what people were thinking of in the past. And many don't necessarily want that. They want to continue working. So I don't think it's only on the younger. I think there's many older people who want to continue working, and I'm hoping that society, work, and others can pave the way for that if that is something that you want. I know myself, I took some time off before. I don't want to stop working anytime soon. I really enjoy it for a variety of reasons. So I'm hoping my age isn't the reason that I'll stop working, but that rather I choose to stop working. So I think that's another thing we need to consider.
And age shouldn't be an impediment, which is why many businesses are adapting the workspaces to accommodate people as they get older. We've talked before about car companies changing some of the machinery and changing some of the flooring to help people who might have less mobility. But I want to bring you back in, Nicholas, to talk about these traditional state-funded public pension systems. Because we're saying there, look, we're not really preparing for 30 years of retirement anymore. Are they sustainable? Do you think that recent pension reforms are ever going to be enough to make that difference? Or is there complete reset thinking in terms of the mindset?
I think there's a lot of confusion about pensions because people focus on finance rather than output. The issue is not public versus private pensions. They both face problems in the face of population aging. The starting point is a very simple point, that workers can consume, so pensioners can consume only what workers produce but do not themselves consume. Pensioners aren't interested in money. Money's just coloured bits of paper with portraits of national heroes on them. Pensioners are interested in consumption, food, clothing, bus rides, heating, presents for grandchildren, etc. So what matters is national output. And as I said earlier, the key issue is not so much reforming pensions, though that's part of the story, but adopting a wide range of policies to increase national output, making individual workers more productive through investing in their skills and in the capital they use. And you've talked about exoskeletons and similar things for older car workers. That's exactly a good example of that. Alongside making each worker more productive, you need more workers. So a higher labour force participation at all ages, including older ages, lower unemployment, longer working life. And when we're talking about longer working life, and this comes back to Haleh's point, it's not just later retirement, it's also, and very importantly, more flexible retirement.
Haleh, I just want to bring you back in quickly, because I wonder if all of this is why, at the World Economic Forum, you're prioritising framing longer lives in a different way.
We do see this as an opportunity. We see it as an area for growth and innovation. We see it as a chance to also bring in and remember the people that were left out the first time that these pensions, Social Security, and other things were created. The first time, gig workers, contract workers weren't necessarily included in. I'd like to think about women who take time off for caregiving, or any family member who takes time off for caregiving. I want them to be remembered. kind of as we're innovating and creating a new kind of pension system for the future, because the way we've lived and worked and taken care of our family is changing. And whereas before we were just taking care of our kids, there's so many people who are taking care of their kids and their parents at the same time, and that really impacts how much they can work. So I think the exciting thing for me is, yes, we're going to innovate. Yes, we're going to improve it. But let's remember the people that we didn't think about the first time we created these pension systems, much of which were created 100 years ago. I think it's normal to want to update and improve systems created so long ago.
Peng, let's talk about China, because with about 40% of the population being over 60 by 2050, China will become a super-aged society. So what opportunities, what economic opportunities do you think that the silver economy offers for innovation, especially in things like healthcare, in housing, and in digital tech?
With the increasing proportion of the aging population, in fact, we talked more about the age-friendly societies. We talk about how to adapt the housing and the whole communities to the aging populations. At the same time, we have seen more and more old people, they are using mobile phones, the internet, so they need more diverse services. So those are the very good push for the innovation for the future, especially in how to keep their healthy aging, how to use the newly developed technology, especially artificial intelligence, for their better living. So that means the increasing number and proportion of the aging population, not just a challenge, but also a chance for the whole societies to adapt to this aging population. It's very good source for the innovation for the silver economy in the coming decades in China and the world elsewhere.
You're all of you talking about the opportunities that we can harness here, with people living longer, with that appetite for extending our working lives. But this kind of change can be a hard sell. I mean, Haleh, you mentioned that these pension systems were written over 100 years ago and that they need to be updated. But, Nicholas, what we're seeing already, especially in places like France, not everybody's happy about any changes, incremental or otherwise.
Well, one of the fascinating things is that every country has its sacred cows, its third rails that politicians touch at their peril, but they're different in different countries. In the UK, we raised state pension age with relatively little political difficulty, but if anybody threatens to bring in even the slightest bit of private healthcare into our national health service, all hell breaks loose. France has got private healthcare mixed with their public system, no problem, but try to raise pension age, and as you say, people come out on the streets. I think a lot of it is political presentation. And I know that when we had a pension reform that raised state pension age, the chair of the government commission, who handled it beautifully politically, on the night the reform was announced, which included an increase in state pension age, he went on television, he looked straight down the barrel of the camera at his audience, and he said, if you're over 50, this won't affect you. If you're over 40, you're going to have to work an extra year. And you could just see the political temperature falling. So I think one of the key lessons is, if you are going to raise state pension age, and you've got to do that, ideally, you do it well in advance, you give people a lot of notice.
Haleh, do you think that maybe the silver economy is being underestimated as a growth engine, particularly in places like China, where the elderly population is growing so fast?
I can see that happening. Along with changing pension systems, the way we work, being more flexible, I think we also have to change the way we view aging. People think that once you turn 60 or 70 or 80, you're done. You're just basically going to sit at home and I don't know, knit or play golf. But that's not the case. These people are living a much more longer active life. And they spend money, they are with their grandchildren, they are out and about enjoying life in a variety of ways. So I think it is a place for economic growth. I would like to say that we at the forum don't call it the silver economy, we call it the longevity economy for a reason. And that's because I like to think about all the generations living longer lives and what all generations can offer with this longer life. So it's not just focused on older people as well. And I think that also helps with the aging conversation, because you don't want it to seem like only the 60-year-old is aging. The 20-year-old is also aging. The 30-year-old is also aging. So I think we need people to remember this is also going to impact them and to consider how they're thinking about what their longer life looks like.
Because the world of work is changing at every level, isn't it? We don't have jobs for life, for example. So the whole way we think about the global economy, not just getting old, all comes into this. I mean, Peng, let's talk a little bit more about China's market-driven elderly services and how you think they compare to what's happening in other places in the world, like Europe's welfare state models.
In fact, I should say it's more policy-driven elderly services currently, because if you read the news in China this year, for example, the long-term care insurance system and also the welfare policies to subsidize the services for the elderly in rural and urban. For example, for those disabled or with ADL problems, the elderly can get 800 yuan per month for their services. So in that case, the market, they can use that subsidy to help the elderly to get their high quality services. So it's not purely market driven, but I should say it's largely supported by the current welfare policy to develop the elderly services in China.
Nicholas, I'd like to talk about investment. I mean, what do you think is needed to get that investment, to boost it in aged tech and elderly care infrastructure? And what's it going to take to get businesses to tweak and maybe better tailor their products and services to an aging but increasingly tech-savvy consumer base?
Well, just to come back to an earlier point about social attitudes, I think we're all systematically badly informed about age, because when we think about how old is old, we think of our grandmother. Now, when my grandmother was 70, she was a very elderly lady. Today, you've got 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds still very much vigorous. In terms of boosting investment, I mean, are you talking about investment generally or specifically in aged tech and elderly care infrastructure?
I think specifically in this longevity economy, in the silver economy, things that are going to help us work and live as we become older. Okay,
so I mean, you need to do things in terms of pension design and labour market to make flexibility more of an option. For example, at the moment in a lot of countries, it's either illegal or very unusual to reduce a worker's pay. In other words, people's pay is meant to go up the whole of their life. Now, if people want to downshift and move to less productive work, it ought to be possible to reduce their wages. But that causes hassle factors in labour markets, so one needs sample contracts agreed between employers' organisations and trade unions to make employing older workers on a more flexible basis more of an easy option. You need to do things on pension design to allow people, for example, to combine part of their pension with part of work. So there's those sorts of things to do, but then you also need, in proper finance, particularly of elder care. In many countries, they either rely on the taxpayer to pay for elder care, or they rely on unpaid work of women, or they try to rely on private insurance. And there are good reasons why none of those is ideal. Germany and I believe Japan have got a system where the finance of elder care is done through a social insurance mechanism, and the finance is part of the story. But then once you do that, you need to combine that with effective quality assurance. So it's back to the points we were making earlier. I mean, Haleh's earliest point, it just needs widespread changes in social attitudes, in labour market design, in pensions, and ideally one wants governments to take a holistic and long-term view of that. One thinks wistfully about governments that can do that.
But that social change is going to need a helping hand, isn't it? Haleh, you were going to chip in there, were you?
Yes, I was. I was going to say that what we're kind of focusing on right now at the World Economic Forum, as we continue to look at the longevity economy, is health. Not just healthcare, but health span. And we think that's increasingly what's actually missing from this conversation and what we'd like to change going forward, because we can't really talk about changing pension systems, changing social systems without talking about healthcare and the health of the individual as well. Because while we're living longer lives, up to 10, 20 years longer, our health span, which is the amount of time we're in good health, is not actually getting as long. And so for many people, those last 10 years are lived in poor health. So that means that's where we're spending quite a bit of our money if we've been fortunate enough to save it and have a pension. So what we're trying to do is have both of these conversations at the same time now, so they're not siloed anymore, where you're having a pension conversation here and you're having a health conversation here. We want both of those things to come together so that when we're thinking holistically, like Professor Barr said about living longer lives, we have the money part, but we also have the health part. And I think that's going to be the really critical difference we need to see going forward.
So if we have the money part and we have the health part, Peng, do you think then ageing societies will maybe spark economic reinvention or stagnation?
Yeah, I believe it's going to spark economic reinvention. In fact, it's happening now. Even so, when we talk about aging societies, super-aged societies in Japan, in Korea, in China, in Europe, in fact, the reinvention is happening everywhere. Not just stay on the shrinking labor force, but how to encourage the innovation, the AI technology. And also, we have to notice, in fact, the increasing older population, the structure is changing rapidly. For example, in China, we have more than 300 million old people, 60 and over, but only less than 10% of them, they are illiterate. But comparing to 20 years ago, about 48% of them, they were illiterate. And also they are more healthy they are healthier than 20 years ago. And the people are living longer. So that's the background. So we have to reinvent the whole system.
Nicholas, what do you think? Do you chime in with that it can only be a force for good? Or is there part of you that worries that if we're going to shake up pension system, if we're going to rewrite the rule book, that actually it's going to stoke more volatility rather than stabilise markets?
I think that government has an essential part to play on this in changing legislation, in helping to shape social attitudes, in financing research and innovation, in financing social care, etc. So I think it is a great opportunity, but to sit back and say, oh, well, markets will solve it, it's all going to happen automatically, I think is being dangerously over-optimistic. I think government involvement and, as we've all been saying, on a holistic range of policies with a long-term view is going to be essential. And the countries where governments do that most effectively will be the ones that deal with the problems most effectively.
And Nicholas, who are those countries that are dealing with those questions more effectively, in your opinion?
12 years ago, I was asked to write a report on the pension system for the government of Sweden. And they've managed to take a long-term cross-party view in their pension reforms. So they did a good strategic reform. They then maintained it. They didn't mess around with it for short-term political reasons. And it made my heart ache because with the sort of short-term adversarial politics you get in countries like the UK and even more in the United States, that sort of holistic long-term view is unrealistic. Sweden's a good example. Canada's a good example. Denmark's a good example. The Netherlands are a good example. There are plenty of countries that do have sensible arrangements for accommodating the costs of population aging. But then there's an awful lot where it's hand to mouth and short-term political opportunism and slamming on the emergency brakes at the last minute because of the financial crisis. And sadly, there's too many examples of those.
Which makes me think, Haleh, is there scope for more international cooperation here, shared learning between the countries Nicholas mentions, between China and the rest of the world, to help tackle ageing and pensions reform?
I think we can only tackle any of these problems, opportunities, innovations, things through public-private collaboration, but also on a global and holistic level. I have this big idea, dream, that just like we have a COP, a Conference of Parties for Climate and Sustainability Issues, I'd like a COP-like version of a global event on aging and longevity. I think it'd be amazing if we could have one town, one city, one country who will bring everyone together, perhaps China, perhaps England, and we have private sector companies there talking about how they can innovate and create new products. We have governments there. We have health ministers there talking about extending health span. We have finance ministers there talking about reforming, reinventing pension systems, and everyone's bringing this together. Because there's also a longevity spectrum that we're going through right now, where many countries are super aging and are going through this already, while many others are facing it, like the US and Europe, I feel like, in the next 10, 20, 30 years. But then we have whole continents like Africa and areas like the Middle East who still have a young population. So there is so much that we can learn from the populations that have already gone through this in order to impact our own and then to pass it down as well.
Peng, what do you think? Do you think these cultural perspectives on ageing, on pension systems are changing quickly enough? And is there, again, an opportunity for more international cooperation to learn from what China's done over the last couple of decades?
Yeah, I think that's very important, especially from the cultural perspective. For the international cooperation in the past 2 or 3 decades, for example, the idea or the framework of active aging or a society for all ages, all of these concepts, and also with the concept of healthy aging, in fact, they play a very important role to changing the culture on aging society in China. We have learned and benefited from that. So it's not just about how to care the old people, but how to make them fully participate in the social development, to share their knowledges.
Peng, Nicholas Barr, Haleh Nazeri, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more agenda content on CGTN Europe's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube channels. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Murray Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are 2 ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project.
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.